The Kli Yakar explains, he sort of misgave al kesher of these two psukim. He's trying to figure out what's that? There you go, the juxtaposition of these two psukim. What does one have to do with the other? That Hashem took us on this circuitous route, right? And we were armed, and all of a sudden we took the bones of Yosef with us. If two psukim come right after the next, there's definitely what to talk about. Darshin smuchim is the concept that you can learn one pasuk out from the next. They have to. So the Kli Yakar sits in it. He says, "What does that have to do? Yikach Moshe's atmos Yosef. What does that have to do with the concept that chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael, that we went out armed?" And in order to explain this, Kedei la'asbir zos hu mevi techilas hanemar b'yalkut parsha zu. He first brings the midrash on this parsha, where it's a very interesting thing. It says that when they were walking in the desert, this is after some time, not right away, after they got the Torah, when they were walking in the desert, they were going around with two chests, two aronot. Aron HaShechina, one was the Aron of the Shechina, and one was Aron Shel Yosef, the coffin of Yosef. And the Goyim, I guess they caught wind of this situation. We're going around holding the box that holds God, and right next to it a coffin. And they said, "What's going on over here? What's going on with these two boxes that you're carrying around?" And what do they say? They said, "Oh, there's a reason for it. This one fulfilled all that it said in this one." And from here they learned that Yosef fulfilled the Aseres HaDibros, right? He fulfilled all the 10 commandments that were in the Luchos of the Shekhinah. So this is the midrash on this. The Kli Yakar brings this midrash in order to explain what the two psukim have to do with each other. He explains what they have to do. He says, "Chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael." What is one of the perushim, the ikar perush that they came out? Chamushim, mezuyanim. They were armed. And Kli Zayin shelehem. What was their armament? Right? And really, he says their armament was nothing other than the Aron HaKodesh itself. In other words, Hashem fought their battles with them. So their armaments were, it's true, Rashi says you're going to ask later where they got swords and so forth. At Mistama, they also had actual weapons, but their true armament, who was fighting their wars for them, was the Aron HaKodesh. Right? That was going with them. It was like, yeah. So therefore, the first pasuk, we're trying to bring the juxtaposition. The first pasuk says chamushim, armed. The second pasuk says v'yikach Moshe's atmos Yosef imo. Now it makes kind of perfect sense. It says they took the bones of Yosef kedei lasbir mashmu shel klei zayin lifnei Matan Torah. And the question is, what was their armament before Matan Torah? Because the truth is, it's very nice that Hashem fought their wars for them. They were armed, but they didn't have the Torah yet at that time when they came out of Mitzrayim. So how can we say that they were armed with the Aron HaKodesh? Bifnei Matan Torah, the Aron HaKodesh was basically switched over with the Atzmos Yosef. That his bones were essentially Aron Shel Yosef. Because these two boxes, they were basically, they were one and the same. This one fulfilled all that was written in this one. So after it says they went out armed, it right away says that he took the bones of Yosef because he was taking the place of the Aron HaKodesh. That the Aron Shel Yosef hayadome keilu hayachakukim bo. It was as if it was engraved in him, all the Aseres HaDibros. He was like Mamash, walking 10 commandments, this Yosef. Okay, turning the page. So that's one way that the Kli Yakar brings these two psukim, makes them make sense together. Then he's not done. He brings another explanation. In other words, what did we just say the connection was that he brought both Yosef's bones, right? It was connected with the end of the first pasuk, which was about them being armed. Now he says, wait, maybe there's another explanation which is connecting with the beginning of the first pasuk, which the beginning of the first pasuk, we probably forgot by now, is that it says, it says that Hashem took the Jewish people on a circuitous route, right, towards the desert, not derech Plishtim, where it would have been closer, as we know, because they would have seen war and run away. So Hashem took them on this strange route through the desert. And therefore, he wants to say that's the first pasuk, and maybe how's that connected to with Yosef's bones over here? So he says, What was Moshe thinking? Chashav Moshe ulay ya'akev alei hamayam. It says since they went derech hamidbar Yam Suf, Moshe sort of, I guess, knew the way. He was a prophet after all. And he said, we're going to bump into a little Yam Suf over here. It's going to be a problem if Hashem takes us this way. So we right away, when it says Hashem brought them in this circuitous path, the next pasuk is, Vayikach Moshe atzmos Yosef. He took the bones of Yosef because he thought, as Yikra lahem b'schus Yosef, that the sea will split in the merit of Yosef. As the sages taught us from the pasuk in that we say during Hallel, Hayam Rav Yanos, right? We say, right, the sea saw and fled. Remember the tune? Mara'ah, what did the sea see and flee? You like that, don't you? Atzmosav shel Yosef. The sea saw the bones of Yosef. That's what the Midrash says. And therefore it split in the schus of the bones of Yosef. So therefore, the beginning, according to the Kli Yakar, there's two ways of understanding the juxtaposition of these two psukim. One is based, let's go back in order. One is based on the end of the parsha, that it says that they were chamushim, they were armed. What were they armed with? They didn't have the aron yet. They were armed with the aron of Yosef. He was the luchos. And according to the second explanation, it's connected with the beginning of the first pasuk, where it says he took them, Yasev Elokim, he took them around in a funny way. Moshe realized they were going to bump into the Yam Suf, and therefore he took the bones of Yosef because the sea would split in his merit. Beautiful, Kli Yakar. The Rebbe says, however, there is always a however. Shnei Perushim Dorshim Bir. Both of these things require explanation. Hey, come on, you can trade stocks later. They require explanation. Particularly, they're all actually beautiful explanations. They work very nicely, but not really according to the simple pshat of the psukim. The psukim lifnei, in other words, the simple words that are said that we went in a strange path, right, a crooked path, and we were armed. It's not mentioning anything that we went with the Shekhinah as an armament, right? That's not mentioned. And therefore, there's no real place to mention suddenly the Aron of Yosef in the place of the Aron of Kodesh, because nothing's mentioned about that. In other words, Rashi, you're thinking Pshat. It's a beautiful little drasha. But all it says is they went out armed. We don't know that their armament was Yosef, that all of a sudden he's going to come and bring, that we have to hear. The next pasuk is that Yosef was the replacement for the Shekhinah. It's nice, but it's not like a 5-year-old wouldn't really necessarily come across and figure out that there's something missing over here that we need to. And also the end of the pasuk, the Indian of mentioning the Yam Suf in Schus Yosef, it's nice, it's a beautiful drasha. It's not really clear that that's what you're thinking suddenly when Moshe grabs his bones. Why? Because you're not thinking that this situation of Moshe grabbing his bones. I'm just trying to explain the Rebbe's question. He loves the drasha of the Kli Yakar, but he doesn't really think that it works as a pshat. Because what is the pshat of Moshe grabbed his bones? As he's soon going to say, it's nothing to do with like what's coming on their circuitous path or that the sea is going to be in front of them. He says why he grabbed the bones, right? What does he say? In the same pasuk, it says, continuing in this over here, the taking of the bones of Egypt was more part of the plot of them leaving Egypt, not of sort of their planning some miraculous warfare and splitting of the sea in the future. According to the Pshat, Yosef made them swear, Pakod yifkod ba'alisem es atzmosai. He made them swear they're going to take his bones with them. So all of a sudden, Hashem is about to lead them out. They're arming themselves. Moshe remembers the oath. He goes and grabs the bones of Yosef. That's the Pshat. Don't tell me about, future wars. Seemingly the simple pshat is that he's just kind of following the way out of Mitzrayim, part of which was that they had to fulfill this oath. However, because he kashura, we must say nonetheless that the Kli Yakar sort of brings to our attention that if one pasuk follows the other pasuk, he's got a point there, right? It must be not just a continuation of a story of Yitzias Mitzrayim, but it comes as some kind of an answer or a follow-up of this notion that they were leaving in this circuitous path. And therefore the Rebbe says there must be a connection, as the Kli Yakar says, to Yasev Elokim es am derech hamidbar, that regarding, so to speak, the future travels, not just their business on the way out. And dafka the halicha b'midbar, because it does say, after all, this pasuk right after Hashem mentions we're going into the desert. So there must be, like the Kli Yakar says, a connection of them, of their future trials and tribulations in the desert. The Yesh Lasbir, we have to understand what is the connection between these two inyanim. In other words, that most Yosef's bones were so vital in the process of our experience that was upcoming in the future, not just sort of we were fulfilling a promise of the past. Kach Yesh Lahavin, and therefore we have to understand that, first of all, what is Yosef's connections to the future?
Yosef knew that they didn't need his bones.
What's that?
It's like Yosef knew.
Exactly. And it was like a part and parcel of their experience going forward. And so that's one point that the Rabbi makes. Then he says, in this classic way, we have to also understand this, since the Torah is nitzchis, the Torah is eternal. It's not just talking about a history of what happened in those days. And it's a hora l'kol Yehudi mikol hatekufos b'kol makom. It's a lesson for every single Jew, in every single time, in every single place. Move on shagam inyan zeh. That this concept of vayikach Moshe's atzmus Yosef imo, that Moshe took Yosef's bones with him, and therefore his also is going into the Midbar on their way out of Mitzrayim, it must have an eternal lesson. V'nosav kan prat Mitzrayim b'kach shapula achad pami shal yikach Moshe's atzmus Yosef. Right. In addition to this simple point of that one-time event that Moshe happened to take his bones out at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, we're going to turn this now into some kind of an eternal lesson for all times. Yoshua.
Maybe I missed it. Why do we say these two verses have to be connected again?
Just because they're next to each other.
We say that everything?
Yeah. I mean, there's a machloikis whether we're darshaning smichos in the whole Torah or just in the fifth book of the Torah. But essentially, there's positions and opinions that we do make a point that anything that's right next to each other is demanding an explanation in the whole Torah. And in general, even those who say we don't darshan smichos in the first four books, which there's all kinds of interesting reasons for that, because there's sort of, God gave them in this way where it was sort of so high that there's like sort of no chronology or time and space that was like really available, so we can't necessarily make sense of the two verses that are next to each other. There's such an opinion, but that's really when it comes to sort of halachic matters. But when it comes to drashas and just sort of like learning Torah, certainly there's a meaning. But anytime something comes one after the next, even the fact that you're sitting next to David has divine implications for all of humanity. You didn't know it, but also exactly. Exactly. Is Yoshua David? You think we're making this up? It's not normal.
I guess. But so it's like just any.
Yeah.
David.
Yes. Anytime there's two things next to each other, you can have at it. 100%. Yes. Okay. Base. Kedei la'avin zos yesh lahakdim levar. In order to understand this, we have to preface and explain what it says in the pasuk V'yikach Moshe es atzmos Yosef imo. David, you were asking this question a moment ago. Why does it say that they took the bones of Yosef specifically? L'chora amnam b'shbasu ishtamis Yosef es atzmo bitoy zeh. Maybe you could say in this pasuk it says the word the bones of Yosef because when Yosef himself asked, he said, "Take my bones out of here." Right? Yosef himself says, "Va'alisem es atzmosai mizeh itchem." So in other words, Yosef was the first person to call himself bones. So maybe in our pasuk now, Moshe is just sort of quoting Yosef. But since this is really not an honorable way to speak about tzaddikim, just grab the bones of the guy. That's like it's not nice, right? So even though Yosef may have wanted to speak lowly of himself, because it is the normal way of tzaddikim to sort of belittle themselves for humility. But now this is not Yosef speaking. This is the Torah relating. So the Torah should not have said the same word Yosef said. The Torah should have said something like "V'yikach Moshe es Aron Yosef imo." It should have said he took the casket of Yosef with him. Why the bones? Not bones. Particularly when we're talking about the first explanation of the Kli Yakar. What was the first explanation of the Kli Yakar? That Yosef was mamish basically a stand-in for the 10 Commandments, right? So that you're going to call the bones, right? It's not like a nice thing to say, especially according to the fact of what he really represented. V'yesh lomar, so we can say, shezos mechuvenes haTorah lahadgish. The Torah says bones, nonetheless. What is it trying to tell us? David, there's a lot of Davids around here. B'yitzias Mitzrayim lakach Moshe imo es atzmus Yosef. Atzmos Yosef, atzmus, right? The essence of Yosef. Nikrayos kach mishum shehena etzem ba'tokev shel Adam v'shel Bal HaChaim. Why are they called the bones of Yosef? Because the bones of a person are his essence, right? It's the essence of a person. It's the essence of an animal, right? And so therefore, the Torah is trying to point out, we're not just taking Yosef, we're taking atzmiuso shel Yosef, the essence of Yosef, the mahus of the Indian of Yosef, the very essence of what he is. V'lekicha zo. And that taking of the essence of Yosef, chashuv b'miyuchad, it's very, very important. Why? Because v'yaseh v'elokim es ha'am derech hamidbar. Because Hashem is taking them in this circuitous path. In other words, this is the Rebbe's pshat. The Rebbe wants to say that there's a necessity to connect these two psukim because it's saying suddenly, calling Yosef by bones. And the only reason it's calling him by bones is it's because it's referring to his essence. And therefore, what's the connection of the two psukim? Because the Jewish people are about to go into a desert, and they're about to go into the desert's not a fun place, right? At all. Snakes, scorpions, horrible things going on there. So therefore, the pasuk comes and says, don't worry, we have the essence of Yosef. And this is like why this verse follows the first one, because it mentions them going to the desert, and therefore we're not going to make it out of the desert unless we have Yosef's essence with us.
Wow.
That's the idea.
Why did bones represent the essence?
In a person? Because I guess it's like your skeletal structure is basically your real, what is the essence of a thing? We're talking about the essence, like you're talking about essential oils, or like you go down to like sort of what makes the thing actually be there. It's core essence, right?
It's kind of like the fundamental information that determines the identity of that thing. Like the essence.
Like you could take
it's like the most reducible element that you can get.
Yeah.
That's still like
boiling it down to so the bare bones, right? Like so it's,
and Yesod does the same
means
thing,
essence, yeah.
Yesod takes like the essence of
You're
all
getting
the other
you're in deep into this Yesod, man.
extends
I can't
into,
shake Yesod out of you there. You're loving it. Okay, let's see. Yeah, let us see. Okay, chapter 3. Okay, so first of all, what is Yosef's essence? Let's get down to the bare bones. It's expressed in his name, Yosef. Why does Yosef mean, in other words, something essential? Asher v'tikra shemo Yosef leimor. What meant, right? Every one of the Shvatim, when they got their name, they got a little description of their name, right? Each one was called by the fact that something took place, that their mother called them on an event or a prayer or whatever, what have you. And when it comes to Yosef's name, it says Tikra Shemo. Who was his mother? Rachel. And when she was born, she called his name Yosef Leimor Yosef Hashem li ben acher. And what did she say when he was? Why was he called Yosef? Because his name means Hashem, please give me another son.
Wow.
It's a very heavy duty thing to be called. I wonder if he had a little sibling rivalry based on that. But he was born with his mother saying, called him, I want another son. Right? And he was born on that name. And the whole idea was that she was chalashing to have babies because she knew that there was going to be 12 tribes to Yaakov. And she was only had one at this point. For a long time, she didn't have any. And she was praying she shouldn't be less than at least the maidservants who each had 2. So therefore, she prayed for another son. And she called him that, Yosef li ben acher. Which means that the Muhuso shel Yosef, and you are your name, right? So what is the Indian of Yosef? Is the Indian of Lahosif Od Ben. Yosef's concept, if you're a Yosef, your job is to add a son. You're like bringing in more sons. That's the essence of a Yosef, is to make a son. But that's not still yet the essence of Yosef, even though it's his name. It's called, his essence seemingly is making a son, but we're not done yet. Why? Because that would be true if she just said Yosef Hashem li ben. If she would have called him Yosef because add me a son, right? But the fact is, what does she actually say? Yosef li ben acher, which means she says, add me a son, an acher, which means the kavana is not just a stam ben, but a ben acher. In other words, a unique type of ben, which is called an acher, which means an other. Right? So this is his essence. His true name is his essence, is that he's in the business of adding ben acher. What does it mean? Shemina acher yasu ben. That from the level of the acher, where we had a sage that was changed his name to acher because he became a heretic and like a womanizer and all kinds of terrible things. So in acher, it's also called the sitra achra, right? Achuraim, kale acher. All the level, the word acher is like a synonym for everything bad in the world, right? The other side. Yeah, that's it, right. When you switch the dalet from Hashem echad to the reish, which is the evil letter, like we learned in Basilagani, you get the opposite of echad. So the Indian is not just that he's Yosef li ben, but he wants to add me a son from an acher, from a level of total trash, basically. Yehudi shubachin is acher. A yid can't call a yid trash, but he's a level of acher. She's naguso who acheres mis nagus yahadus, which means his conduct is foreign or other from a Jewish conduct. To the point that you could just call him acher, right? Like he's just other, which means he's not from the side of kedusha. A yid, chas v'chaliba, a rasha gomer. It's possible you can get to such a low place that you're just called acher. No one can recognize you as a Jew, and yet mimenu tzrich lasos ben. Yosef's Inyan is such a powerful powerhouse that from that guy he can make a ben. Yehudi shenikra boshu ben. In other words, he can turn him into a son, someone who's obviously in the category of banim atem lashem elokechem. You are the children of the Lord your God. So Yosef's essence is a power to actually transform an evil person into a good person. And what we're saying is we're going to soon see. We're going out into the desert. You can't just go out into the desert willy-nilly. You got to grab a atzmus Yosef with you, which means you have to have the power to turn evil into good before you take such steps. We'll continue tomorrow. Right, you guys